Sometimes the most powerful words aren't, "I love you," or "I'm sorry." Sometimes they're 5 simple words whispered by a stranger in the darkness. It's not your time yet. I was 1 second away from letting go completely when those words reached through the void and pulled me back from the edge of everything I thought I wanted to escape. This is a story about the razor-thin line between surrender and salvation, about how a single moment can rewrite the entire trajectory of a life, and about the mysterious ways the universe conspires to keep us here when we're convinced we don't belong. My name is David, and for 28 years, I thought I understood what living meant. I had the checklist life: college degree, decent job at a marketing firm, apartment in the city, weekend plans with friends who knew me just well enough to think I was doing fine. But beneath the surface of what looked like a perfectly normal existence, I was drowning in a kind of emptiness that had no name. It started small, the way these things always do. Little moments where I'd catch myself staring out the office window, watching people hurry past on the sidewalk below, and feeling completely disconnected from the world they inhabited. I'd sit in meetings, nodding along to discussions about quarterly targets and brand awareness, while inside my head, a voice kept asking, "Is this really it? Is this what the rest of my life looks like?" The feeling grew stronger after my dad died 2 years ago. Heart attack at 55. Here one day, gone the next. At the funeral, everyone kept saying how he'd lived a good life, how he'd been a dedicated employee, a reliable neighbor, a man who paid his bills on time and never caused trouble. But as I stood there listening to these well-meaning tributes, all I could think was how similar his life sounded to mine, and how terrifyingly empty that felt. The months that followed blurred together in a haze of routine and numbness. I'd wake up, go to work, come home, watch Netflix, sleep, and repeat. Weekends were just longer versions of the same theme. Friends would invite me out, and I'd go through the motions, laughing at jokes I didn't find funny, making conversation about things I didn't care about, pretending I was present when really I felt like I was watching my own life from somewhere far away. I tried the usual solutions. Therapy helped for a while, but eventually I ran out of things to say to my therapist. That didn't sound like broken records. I dated a few people, hoping connection might fill the void, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was performing the role of boyfriend rather than actually being one. I threw myself into work, stayed late, took on extra projects, thinking that achievement might provide the meaning I was missing. But each promotion, each successful campaign, each attaboy from my boss just felt like another coat of paint on a house that was rotting from the foundation up. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in November. I remember it was a Tuesday because I'd been dreading Tuesdays. They felt like the most pointless day of the week, too far from the weekend to offer hope, too embedded in the work week to feel like a fresh start. I was sitting in my cubicle, staring at a PowerPoint presentation about laundry detergent marketing strategies, when something inside me just snapped. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't throw my computer or storm out of the office. I just sat there, looking at a slide about consumer engagement metrics, and realized with crystal clarity that I couldn't do this anymore. Not just the job, the whole charade of pretending that any of this mattered, that I mattered, that there was a point to getting up tomorrow and doing it all again. That night, I found myself walking. I left my apartment around 9 p.m. with no destination in mind, just needing to move, to feel my feet hitting pavement, to remind myself that I still had a body, even if I'd lost track of having a soul. The city looked different in the darkness, softer, somehow more forgiving. The harsh edges of daytime were blurred by streetlights and shadows, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I walked for hours, through neighborhoods I'd never explored, past late-night diners where people sat alone at windows, past bars where laughter spilled onto the sidewalk, past apartment buildings where squares of light revealed fragments of other people's lives. With each step, the weight I'd been carrying seemed to shift, not disappearing but consolidating into something more manageable, more focused. By the time I found myself on the bridge, It was past midnight. The Riverside Bridge wasn't the city's most famous landmark, but it was tall enough and quiet enough. And on this particular Tuesday night, it felt like the only honest place in the world. I stood at the railing for a long time before I climbed over it. The metal was cold against my palms, and the river below looked like black silk, reflecting the scattered lights from buildings on either shore. It was beautiful, in a way that made my chest tight with something that might have been grief, or might have been relief. For the first time in months, maybe years, everything felt clear. The noise in my head, the constant buzz of anxiety and obligation, and the exhausting effort of pretending everything was fine, went quiet. I thought about my dad, about how he'd spent 30 years in the same job, coming home tired every night, watching the news, going to bed, getting up, and doing it again. I wondered if he'd ever stood somewhere like this, looking out at the water, asking himself if there had to be more to life than just existing. I wondered if he'd found his answer, or if he'd just stopped asking the question. The wind picked up, cutting through my jacket, and I closed my eyes, letting it wash over me. This felt right. Not dramatic or attention-seeking or tragic, just honest. Just the most truthful thing I'd done in years. I was tired of carrying the weight of a life that felt too heavy and too empty at the same time. I was tired of waking up disappointed that I'd woken up at all. I thought about the people who would miss me, and realized with a kind of detached sadness that the list was shorter than it should have been. My mom would be devastated, but she was strong, and she had my sister and her grandkids to focus on. My friends would be shocked, but they'd recover, the way people do. They'd probably say they wish they'd known, wish they'd seen the signs, but honestly, I wasn't sure there had been signs. This wasn't a cry for help. It was just an ending. The water called to me with a voice that sounded like peace. No more pretending. No more Tuesday morning meetings about detergent marketing. No more lying awake at 3 a.m. wondering what the point of any of it was. Just silence and rest, and the end of trying so hard to be someone I'd never actually figured out how to be. I loosened my grip on the railing, feeling my body shift forward slightly. The space between my feet and the edge felt like the last real choice I'd ever have to make. Everything else had been compromise and accommodation, and doing what was expected. This was mine. It's not your time yet. The voice came from behind. Me, soft but clear, cutting through the wind and the distant hum of late-night traffic. I turned my head, still gripping the rail, and saw her, a woman, probably in her 60s, wearing a long coat and walking a small dog that was sniffing around. The base of a lamppost about 20 feet away. She wasn't looking at me. Wasn't running toward me, or reaching out, or doing any of the things people do in movies when they're trying to save someone. She was just standing there, letting her dog explore, speaking to the night air as if she was commenting on the weather. Said, "It's not your time," she repeated, still not looking directly at me. "Whatever you're thinking about doing, whatever brought you here, it's not your time." "You don't know anything about me," I said, and my voice sounded strange, like it was coming from somewhere far away. "I know enough," she replied, and this time she did look at me. Her eyes were kind but not pitying, matter of fact but not dismissive. "I know you're standing on the wrong side of that railing at 1 a.m, and I know that 20 feet from where you are, there's an old woman walking her dog who's been exactly where you are." Her dog, a small terrier mix, finished his business and trotted over to her, tail wagging despite the late hour and the strange circumstances. She bent down to scratch his ears, and when she straightened up, she was smiling slightly. "His name is Charlie," she said. "He's the reason I'm still here to have this conversation with you." I didn't respond, but I didn't move either. Something about her voice, about the calm certainty in it, had created a pause in the momentum that had brought me to this moment. 15 years ago, she continued, I was where you are. Different bridge, same feeling. And Charlie here, well, he wasn't Charlie then. He was a stray dog I'd been feeding who followed me that night. Wouldn't leave me alone. Kept whining and pawing at my leg every time I tried to. She gestured vaguely toward the railing. Eventually, I realized I couldn't do what I'd planned to do with him watching. So I took him home. Just for that night, you understand. I was going to come back. The next night. The dog looked up at her as if he understood every word, then looked over at me with what I swear was the most knowing expression I'd ever seen on an animal's face. But the next night, he was sick. Something he'd eaten, probably. Needed to go. To the vet. And the night after that, I realized I couldn't abandon him after he'd trusted me enough to come home with me. And then weeks passed. And months. And somewhere in there, I stopped planning to come back to the bridge. She took a few steps closer, her dog trotting beside her. I'm not going to tell you that everything gets better, because that's not how life works. Some things get better, some things get different, some things stay hard. But I will tell you this, it's not your time. Whatever story you're telling yourself about why this is the only option, about why the world would be better, off without you, about why there's no point in staying, that story isn't true. I felt tears on my face that I hadn't realized I was crying. You don't understand, I said. I don't know how to live. I've been trying for 28 years and I still don't know how to do it. Neither do I, she said simply. I'm 63 years old and I'm still figuring it out. The difference is, I've learned that not knowing how to live isn't the same as being done living. It just means you're still learning. I stayed on that bridge for another hour, talking to Eleanor, that was her name, while Charlie explored every interesting smell within a 50-foot radius. She didn't try to convince me to climb back over the railing. She just talked about everything and nothing, about her life and her work as a librarian and the books she'd read, and the places she'd traveled and the mistakes she'd made, and the small joys she'd discovered. When I finally did climb back over, it wasn't because she'd talked me out of anything. It was because somewhere in that conversation, I'd remembered what it felt like to connect with another human being, and I realized I wasn't ready to give that up forever. Eleanor walked me home that night, Charlie trotting between us like a furry chaperone. At my building, she handed me a slip of paper with her phone number on it. Not because I think you're going to hurt yourself, she said, but because everyone needs someone to call when the world feels too heavy to carry alone. Kept that piece of paper for weeks before I actually used it. The first time I called, it was on another Tuesday. Not because I was in crisis, but because I'd had a good day at work and realized I wanted to tell someone about it. We talked for an hour about nothing important, and when I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in months. The changes in my life didn't happen overnight. I didn't quit my job and become a different person, or discover some grand purpose that made everything make sense. But I did start paying attention to the small things that brought me joy. The way morning light hit my kitchen window, the satisfaction of solving a particularly challenging problem at work, the taste of really good coffee, the sound of rain on my apartment roof. I started volunteering at the animal shelter where Eleanor had adopted Charlie. There's something about being needed by creatures who can't ask for help in words that puts your own problems in perspective. I learned that taking care of something else was one way to take care of myself. I changed jobs eventually, moving to a smaller firm where I felt less like a cog in a machine and more like a person with ideas worth hearing. I started dating again, but differently this time. Looking for connection rather than distraction, being honest about my struggles instead of pretending to be someone I wasn't. I began calling my mom more often, having real conversations instead of just checking in. I discovered that she'd had her own dark periods, her own moments of questioning whether life was worth the effort. We'd never talked about these things before, but once we started, it felt like finding a language we'd both been waiting years to speak. The most surprising change was that I started writing. Nothing publishable or profound. Just thoughts, observations, attempts to capture the moments that made life feel worth living. I wrote about the morning I watched a hawk circle over the park near my apartment, about the elderly couple I saw, dancing to music only they could hear while waiting for the bus, about the way Eleanor's eyes lit up when she talked about her favorite books. Eleanor and I became genuine friends. We met for coffee every few weeks, and she introduced me to her circle of friends, a collection of retired teachers and librarians and social workers who'd all survived their own versions of Tuesday night bridges. They welcomed me with the easy warmth of people who understand that life is hard and that surviving it is worth celebrating. Charlie became my unofficial therapy dog. Eleanor would bring him when we met for coffee, and he had an uncanny ability to sense when someone needed comfort. He'd plop himself down next to whoever was having the worst day and refuse to move until they smiled. I understood why he'd saved Eleanor's life and why she'd been on that bridge at exactly the right moment to save mine. The phrase, "It's not your time," became my anchor in difficult moments. Not because it promised that everything would work out perfectly, but because it reminded me that I hadn't yet experienced all the moments worth living for. I hadn't yet read all the books that would change how I see the world, or met all the people who would become important to me, or felt all the sunsets that would take my breath away. I learned that the opposite of depression isn't happiness. It's engagement. It's being curious about what happens next, even when next feels scary or uncertain. It's choosing to stick around for the conversations and connections and small revelations that make the hard parts bearable. 2 years later, I found myself back on the Riverside Bridge, but this time I wasn't alone. I was there with Marcus, a 22-year-old I'd met through the crisis hotline I'd started volunteering with. He'd called the night before, not because he was planning to hurt himself, but because he was scared he might want to. And Eleanor had taught me that sometimes the best way to heal from your own pain is to help someone else carry theirs. We stood at the railing together, on the safe side this time. And I told him about my Tuesday night, about Eleanor and Charlie, about the difference between not knowing how to live and being done living. I watched his face as I spoke, saw the recognition in his eyes, the relief of knowing he wasn't the only person who'd ever felt like existence was too heavy to bear. "So what do I do now?" he asked. And I realized it was the same question I'd been asking myself for 2 years. "Now we figure it out together," I said. "One day at a time, one moment at a time. And when it gets too hard to carry alone, we call someone who understands." If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in David's story, please know that Eleanor was right. It's not your time. Whatever brought you here tonight, whatever weight you're carrying, whatever story you're telling yourself about why staying isn't worth it, you matter more than you know, and your story isn't finished yet. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 988, available 24/7. Crisis text line is available by texting HOME to 741741. You don't have to carry this alone, and you don't have to figure it all out tonight. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is choose to see what tomorrow brings. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And remember, we're all still learning how to live, and that's exactly as it should be. Thank you for being here, and thank you for staying.